Hello and welcome to the FollowInTruth Bible study on YouTube. As always, I'm your host, LJ. Today, I'm going to be joined by a special guest, James Snapp JR, and we're going to discuss textual criticism and his views on the subject. Now, most people will be aware of the two main positions when it comes to the critical text, or also to textual criticism. So we've got the critical text, and then we've also got the textus receptus. Now, those are the two main positions. Obviously, there are others. Personally, I hold to a TR position, TR KJV position. Obviously, that is different than James's, and his view is actually slightly different than the textual, than the normal critical text KJV textus receptus position, which I'm sure that he will explain in much more detail as we get into the discussion. For those that know James, he will need no introduction. For those that don't know him, those that maybe follow kind of more my channel rather than specific textual criticism sites, James is obviously very well known on those. For those that kind of more follow me, you may not be aware, although I do in my discussions and my videos, obviously I do cite James quite often. So he has an absolutely awesome blog site. It's www.textofthegospels.com. And I highly recommend going there. A lot of the information that he's probably going to present today will be available on that website, and I really do recommend going there. There's a lot of information, regardless of which position that you actually fall on. The evidence and availability of the things that he has on that website is awesome. Now, before I bring on James and we actually go into the discussion, if you are new to the channel, please subscribe and like. It does really help with the YouTube algorithm, so it's appreciated, anybody that actually likes and subscribes, and it obviously allows you to be kept up to date and notified when I go live and when we have special guests like James today. Just quickly, an upcoming video that I'm hoping to be having a discussion with a Hebrew Israelite. Whether that's going to be just a pure discussion or whether it's going to be some kind of debate format, I'm not too sure yet. I'm trying to get, I'm in discussions with a couple at the moment, but they don't, it's a little bit hard to actually get them to come onto the channel and actually have a discussion. It may be that I actually have to go onto their channel, but that is something that I'm looking at doing in the near future. Please feel free to ask any questions about anything that James states in this presentation that he's going to, and this chat and discussion. We will try to get to them if they're relevant to the point and they need to be answered at that particular time. We'll try and get James to actually answer the question at the time. If not, we'll come back to them at the end of the discussion, and then we'll get to the questions at the end. Please keep them on topic. Any questions that are not on topic are going to be automatically just ignored. We'd like to stay on topic, and obviously if you would like to direct any of those questions at James, please feel free to do so in the comment section, and we'll get James to respond to them either during the discussion or at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on James Snapp JR. So I just need to add to stream. Hello, James.
Hello.
Welcome to the FollowInTruth Bible study. And thank you very much for coming and joining us today and giving your perspective on textual criticism. I know that this is an area that I'm very much interested in, and I know that there are a lot of people out there that are interested in the textual criticism side of Bible study and biblical studies. So tell us a little bit about yourself, James.
Well, I'm James Snapp JR. I preach at a small church in central Indiana. I was on the mission field in Central America from 1990 to about 2000, and then I came back to the United States. I preached at a church in Ohio for 4 years, and since then, since about 2005, I've been here in Indiana.
Okay.
I'm married. I have 3 kids. One in Fishers, Indiana, one in Kokomo, and my daughter is married and living in Tennessee.
Okay. So how long have you been studying textual criticism for?
Since about 1986.
So quite a long time. Yeah. And what was it that got you into textual criticism, that field? What drew you into that particularly?
Well, like many people, I was curious about the footnotes in Bibles because they weren't all the same. Some would make a footnote here and some there. But also, I went to a book sale at Haley University here in Indiana when I was just in high school still. And I found Christoph Lake's little book called The Text of the New Testament. And that kind of stirred my interest to pursue it further.
Okay. What do you think that makes a good textual critic, a modern textual critic? What attributes do you need?
Well, you have to know your history, not just history. Know which church father is working in which area. You have a basic familiarity with how the versions began and where they were used. Also, uh, I would say be able to tell when somebody is really teaching you objective facts from when somebody is giving you propaganda, because it's not always obvious.
Okay, I agree with that. And what about would you say the original languages? Do you think that you need to be able to look into the original languages specifically? Do you need to have studied those, the Hebrew and the Greek particularly, or not?
Well, the two different fields. I myself don't use a whole lot of Hebrew in textual criticism because I mean Hebrew manuscripts. But to do New Testament textual criticism, you do need to know Greek.
You do, or you don't?
You do. Well,
you do need.
Well, in theory, you could do it without Greek, but to do it well, I would say it's almost absolutely necessary.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so where would you like to? Let's get into your presentation. Let's where would you actually like to start? Obviously, you've sent me quite a bit of information that we're going to go through. So I'm just going to follow James. James is going to be obviously the one that is discussing his position, and he wants, and we're going to look at some variants and some different information that James is going to present. So we're just going to follow James and let James dictate where we're going to.
Okay, thank you. Well, first, let's define terms. I hope I speak clearly here. New Testament textual criticism is a scientific task which has two goals. The first goal is the reconstruction of the text in its original form, the form in which it was initially received by the church. The second goal is the reconstruction of the textual history. This involves both the evaluation of rival readings in specific variant units, and the evaluation of the documents in which those readings are found. Now, textual criticism has been around a long time. Some folks focus on Westcott and Hort, but there are many people before Westcott and Hort, and after too. But today, there are mainly four different schools of thought. I'm going to get to my own view after those four. But everybody should be familiar with these four approaches. First, consider Byzantine priority. Now, this is not the TR view. Byzantine priority is close to the Byzantine priority view, but the Byzantine priority view is not the same thing. But in the Byzantine priority approach, Greek manuscripts which display a Byzantine text are considered superior witnesses on the grounds that the text has a plausible transmission history. You can pick any series of readings in the Byzantine text. That's the Robinson viewpoint. Or this one, Hazard Farstad. You can pick any reading, any series of readings on any page. And it can be shown to have considerable manuscript support. Meanwhile, in the Nestle-Aland text, you're probably familiar with this. In the Nestle-Aland text, you could say it's a test tube text. It often combines readings in a series, one after the other, that is unattested in any Greek manuscript. Now, although it's been argued that it is unavoidable when you're selecting readings from different text types that you're going to get this, still, the point remains that a heavy burden of proof should be upon the compiler whose work implies a transmission history in which no copyist has ever preserved, as far as you can tell from our manuscripts, the original combination of readings in hundreds of passages. So that's Byzantine priority and the advantages of it. Then there's what I call the Alexandrian ultra preference. I mentioned Westcott and Hort. Hort regarded a specific set of manuscripts as superior to all others. In this case, Codex Vaticanus and whatever allies Hort could find for it, usually Sinaiticus also. He built a transmission model that vindicated its readings. Having established Vaticanus as the best overall witness in a relatively small series of contests, he gave it enormous weight, with the result that it just kept getting better and better as more and more contests were decided by the weight of the witnesses, to the point that long segments of Hort's compilation resemble transcripts of Codex Vaticanus. Now, decades before Hort, a man named Granville Penn had made a translation in English in 1836, and that was basically as much as he could, unless it was at a passage where Vaticanus had an obvious error. Granville Penn's main manuscript for that translation was Codex Vaticanus. Now, Hort's endorsement of the Alexandrian text was not absolute, but it was so strong that he openly stated that variants shared by the Alexandrian text two flagship codices should be accepted as the true readings until strong internal support or strong internal evidence is found to the contrary. And he also wrote, no readings of Aleph, that's Codex Sinaiticus, and B, that's Vaticanus, can be safely rejected absolutely. Meanwhile, he said, all distinctly Syrian, that is Byzantine, readings must be at once rejected. So Hort was basically setting aside all the manuscripts that are represented in the Byzantine text in favor of the Alexandrian text, which at his time was mainly represented by Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Now, you should understand that Christian readers might be intimidated by the idea that textual critics try to find the original text when they're working with 135 Greek papyri, about 330 manuscripts, about 3,000 minuscules, and about 3,500 lectionaries, plus original materials and patristic materials. Some folks may say, let's just use what we have at hand. Whatever text we have on the shelf, we're going to use that. The thing is, not everybody has the same thing on the shelf. So when they disagree, the way to find out, or the way to discern what is the original text, is to do textual criticism. Becoming acquainted with the context of manuscripts will help you become a textual critic. Now, this will give a person additional responsibility, but also additional confidence. Somewhat like the confidence that a traveler who knows his maps and has traveled in the lands and seas that are depicted on the map. He can tell you when a map is wrong. Meanwhile, a person who has no awareness of the area where he's going and has no way to read a map, he has to just trust his guides. But knowing the message of the map we have, and being aware of what parts are still questioned and why they're questioned, can make one a confident traveler. But after we have done our best to reconstruct the map accurately, it would do us little good if we only possess the map and never travel. So, I would encourage the readers here at the outset, consider the words of J.A. Bengal, one of the pioneers of New Testament textual criticism. Apply all of yourself to the text, and apply it all to yourself. Now, we'll get back to Hort. Another aspect of Hort's approach has been shown to be in error. This was the Alexandrian ultra-preference approach. Hort asserted that, this was back in 1881, that even among the numerously unquestionably spurious readings of the New Testament, there are no signs of deliberate falsification of the text for dogmatic purposes. But in his own generation, John Bergen insisted that the opposite was true. And in his book called Causes of Corruption, published posthumously in 1896, Bergen even included a subchapter called Corruption by the Orthodox. Now, almost a century later, in 1993, Bart Ehrman published a book with a very similar title, The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture. Now, as a result, even though Ehrman exaggerated his case in many respects, no textual critic now considers Hort's assertion to be correct. But there are two other approaches to consider. Thoroughgoing eclecticism, also known as rigorous eclecticism, values the relative intrinsic qualities of rival variants as the best means to determine their relationships. In this approach, even if a reading appears exclusively in late witnesses, if its intrinsic qualities are judged to be better than its rivals, it is adopted on the premise that its youngest supporters support an older text, namely the autograph, at that particular point. Building on the theory that text types did not stabilize until the 200s or later, thoroughgoing eclectics resort to the only sort of reconstruction which can be undertaken without appealing to the relationships of text types, that is, the relationships of rival variants. Advocates of this approach tend to be more willing than others to introduce conjectural emendations. Now, be aware I'm going to be using some jargon, but if anybody has any questions about what did he mean by that, when he said lectionary or conjectural emendation, feel free to ask questions as we go. Besides the visiting priority and Alexandrian ultra-preference and thoroughgoing eclecticism is also what's called reasoned eclecticism. Hold on. Reasoned eclecticism, in theory, considers the relative intrinsic qualities of rival variants, but also considers the quality of each variant's sources, their date, and their scope. The text of the UBS Greek New Testament was compiled using a form of reasoned eclecticism. In its companion volume by Bruce Metzger, Metzger wrote that theoretically it is possible that the Koine text, that is, the Byzantine text, may preserve an early reading which was lost from the other types of text, but such instances are rare, extremely rare. Actually, I think that quote comes from his handbook, not from the commentary. But such an anti-Byzantine bias is pervasive in the text. So it's no surprise that the UBS text varies only slightly from Hort's text, even though more evidence in favor of Byzantine readings is available to researchers than ever before. And for evidence of how heavily Alexandrian the UBS text and the Nestle text is or are, I already provided some links. Well, now we come to my approach, which is called equitable eclecticism. In equitable eclecticism, the relative interest.
James,
Yes.
before you go into yours, why do you think that, or in your opinion, why would you say that the UBS text, although we've obviously since Hort, and obviously you say that they're very similar texts, why is that UBS text still so similar to the Hort text, even though we have so much more evidence available today? What is it that makes that UBS text so similar to the and not really changed in all that time?
Well, we can just go to Kurt Allen, one of the editors, and also to Bruce Metzger and ask them because they've written about it. Let me get my glasses on, and I have one of Allen's books right here. Kurt and Barbara Allen, in this book from 1982, wrote that it should also be remembered that the date of manuscript is no more a clue to its significance than its length. That from the 6th century there have been preserved several manuscripts of consummate artistry, parchment stained purple, inscribed with silver letters, and illuminated with gold, and yet, since they offer nothing more than a Byzantine text, even in the renowned Codex Rossinensis, they are, in consequence, quite, note the wording, quite irrelevant for textual criticism. In terms of age, only unshelled manuscripts which derive from the 3rd/4th century or earlier have an inherent significance. So, basically, even though there are some who talk about what an embarrassment of riches we have, in Kurt Allen's own words, if a manuscript has a Byzantine text, it is irrelevant for textual criticism. Which, obviously, if you're not going to follow the Byzantine text, then your focus is going to be, and your decisions will be almost always in favor of the Alexandrian reading. So, all you need is editors or compilers who have that same approach, and they'll come to the same conclusions.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will allow you to continue on.
All right. Well, Equitable eclecticism develops a general model of transmission history and estimates of the relative values of the readings of groups through a 5-step process. Step number 1 is the witnesses, that means manuscripts, versions, patristic writings, they all get organized one by one into groups which share distinctive variants. Now, you can think of distinctive readings not to say everybody's using absolutely the same text. Think of them as stars in a constellation. Some of the stars you can see through a telescope, but with the naked eye, you can't see all of them. So they don't all have the same reading, but they have many of the same. But they do have many of the same readings. Second, variant units involving variants distinct to each group are analyzed according to textual principles or canons. Now, this is canon, not firing cannon, CANON. Third, a tentative model of transmission history is developed. The cumulatively explains the relationships of the competing groups to one another by explaining the relationships of the component parts, where distinctive variants are involved. This model includes the premise that the Byzantine text, that is, the text of over 85% of the manuscripts, is a stratified text. The earliest stratum of the Byzantine text of the Gospels, that's echoed by Family Pi, the Peshitta, Codex A, part of Codex W, the Gothic version, and the purple codices N-O, etc., arose without a recension of manuscripts representing other texts. Even readings supported by a higher stratum of the Byzantine text, and not by the lowest one, are not rejected automatically. Step 4. Values are assigned to individual witnesses. Less dependence upon one group by another group is implied cumulatively by the relationships of variants to the rival variants in other groups, yields a higher assigned value. Fifth step. All reasonably significant variant units which make us translatable difference are analyzed according to textual critical canons, using all potentially helpful materials. When internal considerations are finally balanced, and when the decision is difficult, special consideration is given to readings attested by whatever group appears to be least dependent upon the others in the proximity of the difficult variant unit. Now, ideally, this will yield the archetype of all groups. There will be some points of instability, especially where variants are difficult, and there might be some instability regarding orthography. There are several additional principles that are put to use in equitable eclecticism. I'll give 9 to start out with. First, textual criticism is a science, not an art. It is an enterprise of reconstruction, not creation. Number 2, the text of the New Testament should be reconstructed in its component parts: the Gospels, Acts, general epistles, the Pauline epistles, and Revelation. The same materials, let me rephrase that. The materials are not the same for the Gospels as they are for the general epistles, and not the same for Revelation as they are for Acts. So each one of these units should be considered on its own. Third, relationships shown by patterns of readings in one part of the New Testament are not assumed to exist in the others. Fourth, the genealogical descent of a group of manuscripts from an ancestor manuscript other than the autograph is not assumed without actual evidence that establishes links among specific manuscripts, such as shared formats, shared marginalia, shared art, shared paratext, like book introductions, and lectionary-related materials in the margins, are readings that show conclusively a historical connection. Number 5, variants involving nomina sacra or the treatment of sacred names receive special attention. Number 6, the assumption of prefer the shorter reading is rejected. Number 7, if a variant has very sporadic support from witnesses greatly separated by age and textual character, this may indicate that the variant was liable to be spontaneously created by copyists, rather than that it was transmitted by distant transmission streams. Number 8, exceptional intrinsic merit is required for the adoption of variants attested exclusively or nearly exclusively by bilingual manuscripts in which a Greek variant may have originated via retro-translation. That is, when the Greek text has been translated into Latin, and then the Latin translator tries to translate it back into Greek. Number 9, conjectural emendations are not to be placed in the text. Now, this approach, called equitable eclecticism, also utilizes some principles shared by other approaches, and these principles are all superseded by principle 0, which is no principle should be applied mechanically. So now I'll list those. Number 1, a variant that explains its rivals, that is, the other rival readings, with greater elegance and force than it is explained by any of them, is more likely to be original. Now, this is important, but is sometimes balanced by other considerations that point in the opposite direction. For instance, in Matthew 12:47 and Mark 11:26. Number 2, a variant supported by witnesses representing 2 or more locales of early Christendom, and by early mean like the where in the first 4 centuries of Christianity, is more likely to be original than a variant supported by witnesses that represent only 1 locale. And this is one of the problems with the alter preference for the Alexandrian text. So often, the witnesses seem to come from 1 locale of Egypt. Number 3, a variant which can be shown to have had, in the course of transmission of the text, the appearance of difficulty, either real or imagined, which is rivaled by variants without such difficulty. Then the difficult moment, in such case, the one that's difficult is more likely than its rivals to be original. But this too can be balanced by other factors, such as when a reading is just nonsense. Number 4, a variant supported by early Greek attestation is more likely to be original than a variant supported exclusively by late Greek attestation. Number 5, a variant which conforms a statement to the form of another statement in a similar composition or in the same composition is less likely to be original than a rival variant that does not exhibit conformity. Now, this mainly pertains to harmonizations, but those are not exclusive to the Gospels. Number 6, a variant which involves a rare, obscure, or ambiguous term or expression is more likely to be original then a rival variant that involves an ordinary term or specific term or specific expression. Number 7. A variant which is consistent with the author's discernible style and vocabulary is more likely to be original than a rival variant which deviates from the author's usual style and usual vocabulary, and the vocabulary that he may be naturally expected to have been capable of using. Number 8. A variant that is fully explained as a liturgical adjustment is less likely to be original than a rival variant which cannot be thus explained. Number 9. A variant which is capable of expressing anti-Judaic sentiment is less likely to be original than a rival variant which is less capable of such expression. Number 10. A variant which can be explained as an easy transcriptional error, in other words, when the scribe has made a mistake in writing, oftentimes by losing his place in his exemplar. Such a variant is less likely to be original than a rival variant, which is less capable of having originated in the same way. Number 11. A variant which can be explained as a deliberate alteration is less likely to be original than a rival variant, which is less capable of being explained in the same way. And number 12. All things equal, in the Synoptic Gospels, a variant that does not result in a minor agreement is more likely to be original than a rival variant which results in a minor agreement. And that is the basic guidelines of my approach.
Okay, so your approach obviously is that there are major differences in your approach than specifically those along the critical text, and it's also obviously different than those that follow the TR as well in certain places, because I think that following a lot of what you do in your work, I would say that a lot of your positions actually you do follow the TR reading over the Alexandrian reading, in certain places anyway. Do you find that you are kind of in the middle of this kind of war between these two sides, and do you kind of get like pushback from both sides? Do you find that you're facing that quite often? So it doesn't matter which position that you fall on, you're obviously going to get pushback from one of the sides. Are you finding that? Do you have many people that follow your particular approach?
Well, I think I have found some folks who are very much in favor of the Alexandrian text, or the text that's the basis of the ESV and the NIV, etc. But some folks, when they hear that you think that the last 12 verses of Mark are original, they'll say, "Oh, you must be a King James onlyist," which I'm not.
Yeah.
Others say, "Well, you have this view because you must hold to Byzantine priority," which I don't. Others must say, "Well, you must hold this view simply because you're conservative." And again, there are all kinds of presumptions that they want to make, like to excuse the view, without actually having to go back to the evidence. Say, "Hey, my compilers have been ignoring the evidence," because nobody wants to say, "All right, the Bible that I've been using was written by people who had half a dozen false premises." Like when Royce published his findings about the early papyri and said, "Well, ever since Hort, at least, and probably long before Hort, people have been saying prefer the shorter reading." Actually, it was one of Griesbach's canons. But Griesbach, as he presented it, that was very heavily modified. and somehow the modifications gradually got dropped away. And Royce kind of corrected that. So today, I'm not the only guy saying we shouldn't consider length as a measure of whether this reading has a better claim to be original or not.
When it comes to the reading, which would be considered the most difficult reading, how do you stand on that position? So do you always favor the most difficult reading as being the original?
Not always, but as I just explained, usually the more difficult reading is right, because the thing is that scribes tend to want the text to be understandable. They didn't want people to always be reading or to be hearing, because oftentimes it was read in church, and just to be scratching their head like, what does that mean? So sometimes scribes are the people in charge of the scriptorium, to make the text easier to understand, would go from a more difficult word or a rare word or an obsolete word to a word that they knew that the readers would understand. The intent was to bring out the meaning of the text. Sometimes that meant changing the word from a word that was no longer used to one that was. So when we try to reconstruct the original text, yes, I would say that the more difficult word does indeed tend to be the original word. But not always. There are cases where scribes simply made mistakes and wrote nonsense. Or cases where scribes who knew Latin a lot better than the Greek borrowed from Latin to try to replace the Greek.
Okay.
Like I said, principle 0, none of the canons should be applied mechanically.
Yeah,
with every single canon, you can find an exception.
And what kind of reception do you get from specifically those that would be classified as like more KJV only, or specifically Textus Receptus? So do you get a good reception from those, or are you kind of alienated from them as well?
Well, for the most part, unless a person can basically, unless a person has consistently shown that he's not going to change his mind, and he's not really being guided by the evidence, but by his own stubbornness, I like to keep the lines of communication open.
Okay, because when it comes to, like, I would say, like, for me, the biggest three textual variants, you've got the 12 verses at the end of Mark, the longer ending of Mark. Then you've got obviously the woman caught in adultery in John, and then we've also got obviously 1 John 5:7. So of those, two of those you actually you accept as certainly the longer ending of Mark, because you have an absolutely awesome blog on that and the evidence of the longer ending of Mark, and I'm pretty sure that you think that the woman caught in adultery is original, but obviously you reject 1 John 5:7 as being the original. Am I correct in that position on you? I don't want to misrepresent you. So
yes, all three those things are true. The thing, as far as how you describe my position. So regarding the ending of Mark, I think that it was in the text of the master copy of all the archetype of all manuscripts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, regarding the woman caught in adultery, I think it too was in the original text of John. But the mechanism that caused its loss, didn't affect just 1 or 2 manuscripts. It affected about 1/5. What has happened there was some scribes, for the reading, when the text was being put into different lections for different days, the lection for Pentecost went from John 7:37 to John 7:52, and then jump down to John 8 verse 11, and with that verse it closed. But somewhere along the line, a copyist pretty early, like second century, was reading the instructions they had, reading the instructions for the lector, the person reading the text, and the Bibles and the churches, saw the instructions for the lector, the reader, and he thought these were instructions for him. And so, as a very rigorous scribe, very meticulous, he did what he thought was following the instructions. He thought those instructions were for him. And that's why when he saw the instructions in the margin that said, and these would be in little symbols, the symbols we can still see in manuscripts today, by the hundreds. When he saw the symbol that said, jump down from here to here, that's exactly what he did. The symbol said, can jump from here, and so we jumped it forward. Then we say resume here. Well, at the end of John 7:52, the symbol said jump, and the resume symbol was there at John 8:11. I'm sorry, I should be saying 8:12, I think. Yeah, and so that's what he did, and just like that, in that particular transmission line, those 12 verses of John disappeared. The scribe did not have a bad intent. He was not being malicious. He was not trying to erase scripture. He thought he was following his instructions. And that's one thing that should probably be another canon that often comes into play, which is try not to ascribe to malice what can be described by simple incompetence.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we see manuscripts where, for instance, in Mark 11, people say, well, those Alexandrian scribes must have hated the Bible because they took this verse out. But all you need to take out Mark 11:26 is to have a bad line of sight, because the verse that comes before it ends with the same letters that Mark 11:26 ends. So what seems to have happened is a scribe, a pretty early scribe, because it affected manuscript in the Alexandrian dictionary. So all you need is a scribe who writes one line and looks down what he's doing, and then when the line of sight comes back up, he goes back to the wrong place. He's actually accidentally skipped a line. He's not being devious. He's simply making a mistake. And the same thing happens in Matthew 12:47. That verse is missing from the text of the ESV, but it should be there. And the reason why we're missing is the same kind of thing. The phenomenon called parablepsis, in which the scribe simply loses his line of sight, and when he resumes, he's picked up in the wrong place.
I'm just trying to find on your website because I just want to bring it up so that people can see it. So I'm not sure if this is the best page. This one is from 2015. That's the one I found on the case of the adulteress. I'm not sure if that's the correct.
Well, I'll have some information, but that one focuses particularly on some things that Dan Wallace has said about it, which are basically way off. Wallace has made several comments about these materials that really should be retracted. But you can find details about the story of the one called an adultery in my ebook, which is available at Amazon as a Kindle book for $1. Well, 99 cents.
Okay, and you also have an ebook on the longer ending of Mark as well.
Yes, I've been trying to get a new version out because so much more information has come out since the time I originally published the book. But the old version is still available on Amazon for 99 cents, or you can buy a scholar's version, which is the same book for, I think, $35. But it's
Right.
the
Okay.
same book.
But it's the same book, but is that a book format rather than e-format for the?
No, they're both Kindle books. It's just sometimes people think, well, if I want a more expensive book, it must be better.
Right. Okay. Those have two different versions. Okay. So, obviously, you've so I want to get to obviously the information that you've sent me as well, so to have a look at. I'm aware of the time as well, so we kind of said we were going to roughly about an hour's worth of chat, and then see if anybody wanted to ask any questions. We haven't had any specific questions at the moment, but that's fine. We'll just let you carry on talking. I'm more than happy for you to continue talking. We seem to have lost James. Hopefully he'll be able to come back in. But in the meantime, yeah, this is James's website. So this is the textofthegospels.com, and I certainly recommend going to it. So if we go back to the homepage, and actually James has returned. So this is the homepage. The information on there is awesome. I really recommend James's website. Whether you agree with everything that he states or not, there is so much information available on there. There are literally hundreds of writings that James has done. They have helped me in my studies since I've been doing looking into textual criticism. So I really recommend going there. And like I say, if James has got those 2 books available, if you would like to delve into a little bit more and look at those 2 specific variants. Now, obviously, not last week, the week before, I think it was, I spoke to Stephen Avery. I don't know if James had managed to view that, but I had a chat with Stephen specifically on 1 John 5:7, and I know that James does not agree, and he doesn't follow that particular verse. But of those 3 big ones, James has obviously written 2 books on 2 of those verses, or 2 passages anyway. The longer, the 12. Okay, James. Yeah.
Well, LJ, if you go to the big link site at my church page, I have there a whole page full of resources about 1 John 5:7.
Yeah. I definitely, I've seen that. So that's on your blog page, isn't it?
No, well, the individual articles are, but the link page is at Curtisville CC /comma.
Okay.
If you go back to
is it that one?
Yes,
That one, yeah.
Just scroll all the way down. And then go to the right.
Let's see. Where? I've lost it.
Oh.
There we go. Back. So I need to
scroll over a little bit to the right.
Yeah. There we go.
Resources.
No.
Oh,
there. Resources for the study of 1 John 5:7 there.
Yes. Here I give an overview. I discuss Cyprian. I discuss the grammar, but I also look at the main manuscripts. I mentioned in one of the canons that I listed was a reading that is not found in any early Greek manuscripts is much more likely to be original than a reading that is found in exclusively late Greek manuscripts. The Comma Johanneum was used in Latin in Africa, that is like places like Carthage, in the 400s. It was known in the 300s. but the writers who use it consistently are writers who wrote not in Greek, but in Latin. When we don't see a reading in Syriac, and we don't see it in Coptic, and we don't see it in any European language or dialect, and we don't see it in Greek, we only see it in Latin, well, the implication is it probably originated in Latin because it doesn't have support in any other place, except other places that were later on influenced by the Latin.
Okay.
And
Just quickly, so I just want to give that that website. So if anybody would actually like to see what James has actually written on that and some of the links that he's got there, specifically, it's available at this website, curtisville.cc.com/comax.html. And obviously everything that James has obviously just stated is available there. Now we have obviously your Nick Sayers. So we've got a question specifically. So during the discussion that I had with Stephen, we went specifically into the we tried to look at the grammar of 1 John 5:7, and so we had a look at that. Obviously, I can see there the link there to Barry Hofstetter, the Common Johannium and Greek grammar. Stephen gave his view on that. So, as Nick has asked the question, what are your thoughts on Georgios Babianiotis and his vindication of Vulgaris?
I think Babianiotis has approached the question as a grammatical question, basically looking at what he sees in the patriarchal text and what is seen in the Alexandrian text, what is seen in all the other Greek manuscripts that don't have the Common Johannium. He has approached it from a grammatical perspective. Basically says, well, yes, I would say that with the comma, it has better grammar. That is simply saying that makes it easier. When you make it a little bit harder without the comma, you're actually tending to show that without the comma, it was more likely to be original. We go back to that canon that I mentioned before, with preference for the more difficult reading. But also, I think that Mr. Babianiotis' or Dr. Babianiotis' general approach has been well answered by Barry Hofstetter, and also follow the comments on that page, and you'll see some of the reasons why the grammar objection is no objection at all. Whatever Vulgaris said centuries ago is vastly outweighed when we simply look at the manuscripts and we look at the evidence and we see that what has happened is this reading originated in Latin. And then from there, eventually, it made its way into a few late Greek manuscripts. But both in patristic writings and in the manuscripts themselves and in other Greek witnesses, we see 1 John 5:7 without the Common Johannium. Now, also, we see that the Common Johannium entered the Textus Receptus because Erasmus, even though he hadn't put it in there in his first editions, he said that in the course of his dialogues with some other people of his time, he said, if I had had one Greek manuscript that had it in there, I would have put it in. Well, shortly after that, somebody found a Greek manuscript that had it in. But even in that Greek manuscript, it doesn't have the comma in the exact form that you still see it in the TR. So those who champion the Common Johannium, I think, fail to appreciate the scope of the evidence the Greek evidence against it, because every Greek manuscript of First John that does not have the Comma Johanneum is a witness against it, as are the various Greek writers who don't have it. Those are also against it. And oftentimes, TR advocates want to say, well, we want to use the text that's been used by the church all this time. Well, look at the manuscripts they used. All through the history, from the earliest ones, all through the Middle Ages up until now, the Greek church didn't have the Comma Johanneum in their manuscripts. It was simply not there. And so it's hard to break through the idea that the traditional text of the Greek church is not the same text of First John as what they would want it to be. Erasmus, after saying, if I had one Greek manuscript with the Comma Johanneum, I would have put it in there, and then being shown a Greek manuscript that had it in there, after that, he put it in his third edition. Because obviously, after having said what he said before, that if he had one Greek manuscript, he would have put it in, he hadn't really made a promise. We can see how he would feel obligated to put it in after that, because if he didn't put it in still, then people will say, Erasmus, you said you would have put it in if you had one of your manuscripts. Well, no, now you do. So Erasmus was not fulfilling a promise he made. There was no rash promise. Metzger simply was wrong about that point and should have retracted his statement. Actually, he did, but in a footnote at the very back of the book. So that's my approach with George Babiniotis. I don't think Babiniotis, when he said what he said earlier, was aware of what the manuscripts say, or rather what they don't say. He was making a call as a grammarian on a question of grammar, without chiming in and to say, yes, I want my opinion to be used by textual critics of First John.
Okay, so I've just got a couple of questions that I just want to ask you about that. So the first one was that obviously you stated that so the Greek church didn't have 1 John 5:7. They weren't using 1 John 5:7. How would you answer though that the Catholic Church, the church that obviously kind of says that they're the original church and they gave us the canon, that they throughout the history have used 1 John 5:7. So the Latin, to those that used the Latin, they were using 1 John 5:7 throughout history.
Not in every case. There were different centers of the Catholic Church, and different centers could use different manuscripts, but especially in North Africa, that's where the comma use originated, and that's where it was used. Also, Cassiodorus, who was there in Italy, had the comma Johanneum. But again, this was Latin, and later on, as Latin, the use of Latin grew and outpaced Greek, Latin text became more popular. But popularity just tells us what was popular. It doesn't make it original, right?
And what would you say with Erasmus having like? I know he left it out of the first two editions of the TR because obviously he didn't have the Greek. But do you think that Erasmus would have been swayed by just one single manuscript if he wasn't kind of more aware of the comma than just one manuscript that was then suddenly presented to him, that now he's going to keep it, he's going to put it into his edition of the TR? Do you think that a man such as Erasmus would be swayed by just that one little manuscript if he wasn't if he didn't have more confidence in the originality of it?
Well, after Erasmus said what he said, he was kind of trapped himself. After he had been accused in writing of being neglectful for not having the comma, in his response, that was when he said, if he had a single Greek manuscript that had the comma, he would have included it. After having said that, then being shown Codex 61, which at the time he called Codex, the Codex for Britain, when that showed up, then he almost was required, now not really required by anybody outside, but in order to avoid having a critique of his character, having said, if I had one Greek manuscript with it, I would have included it. After having said that, then in subsequent editions, he would have been under great pressure to include it because he'd have said that what he said before. If I had one Greek manuscript, I would include it. So all it would take was one.
Even such a late manuscript as it was and kind of presented to him, he would have felt he wouldn't have been able to say Erasmus wouldn't have been able to say, well, actually this manuscript has no kind of authority. Yes, you have presented me with. He kind of didn't really give any pushback to that manuscript. That's kind of where I'm trying to go with it, is that he's presented with this very late manuscript that kind of, whether it was or wasn't produced specifically for this, that's for another debate. But this late manuscript, and he's just presented with this one, he wouldn't have felt that he would have been able to say, well, actually this manuscript has no authority. It's just been produced. It's not worthy of me putting that into. He's changed. It's a big decision to put that verse into scripture. That's where he's gone. He's gone from 2 editions of non-inclusion to just suddenly to now having it included as scripture in his work, and then going forward on that basis of that one manuscript. I find that I find it a little bit hard to accept that he would be able to do that without any kind of pushback.
Well, in his original response to Lee, his critic, he didn't say, if I had one early manuscript. He didn't say, if I had one manuscript where there was an unstule. He just said, if I had one Greek manuscript, I would have included it. So that set the stage, that defined the parameters, what they were and what they weren't for Erasmus in the future. So again, when Codex 61 was brought forth and it was made known to Erasmus, at that point, he could not say, when he said, I'm now going to make another edition, if he hadn't included it, then people would say, wait, how can you not include it? Because earlier you said if you had one, you would include it. And you didn't say one of this sort, one special one. You just said one manuscript. Well, here's one manuscript. So Erasmus kind of painted himself into a corner. But considering that the contents of the Johannine Canon are true, it probably wasn't as big a deal to him. Erasmus, in his earlier editions, had put conjectural emendations into his text at James 4:2, and when he made Revelation, he retro-translated the last 6 verses. Now, these were things that he did, which he would openly say, no, this is a text that I'm giving you as an addition, not as the end-all and be-all. So Erasmus expected and welcomed his work to be refined by others.
And what would you say of the Cyprian quotation? I believe that you do reject that one as a direct quotation of 1 John 5:7 as support of such.
Yeah. I go into detail about that in the blog post that I put up that was specifically about that. The idea is that when you look at the Comma Johanneum and you see how it's worded, I'd rather look at it exactly so I can make sure I get the wording correct. So give me a moment. If anybody can think of any other questions that they can. I'm turning to it.
Yeah, so in the meantime, we've got, so let's just go through, and I don't want to miss any of these. So the Nick's question of what is the Snapp's text, what are the translations of it, and who else uses it, defends it. We can come back to that because obviously we're dealing specifically with 1 John at the moment. So I'd rather see if we can find Nick's other statement, other question here. So does the grammatical argument disappear if we had or if we have a lot of Greek manuscripts without the comma?
Yes, I don't think the grammatical argument is really substantial at all. But there again, this ground has already been plowed. If you just look in the work that I provided with Barry Hofstadter.
Okay.
Now, okay, I've got the comment in front of me. When it says the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. What you have in the next verse, in verse 8, it says, "And there are three that bear witness on earth: the Spirit, the water, and the blood, and these three are one." And as I explained again, we had the lecture earlier. What has happened is that people are making a spiritual analogy to the Spirit, the water, and the blood, except in Latin. And if you follow along in the Latin copies, you can see it. The Spirit, the water, and the blood are switched around. They're in a different order. And if you follow the Latin order, then it corresponds to the Father, the Word, and the Spirit. So the order in Latin, and it's not any Latin text, but specifically the Latin text that is the Old Latin that was used in Africa. In that Latin text, those witnesses have a transversed order. And where the order is transversed, that's where we see the comma. So the comma follows the transversal, the change in order, like a puppy dog. When the order is not transposed, the comma doesn't come along. But when the order is transposed, the comma does come along, because they want to be, somebody wanted these things to match. So they match in order. And again, that's explained more fully in the materials that I already gave you that can be tracked down in the list of readings. So I would encourage anybody who's really locked into the comma to look into the materials that I've already written, so we don't go plowing plowed ground again. Yes, these 7 articles.
Okay, so that's the website if you would like to go on. Obviously, the last video I did with Stephen, I gave out obviously his website, purebibleforum.com. So obviously you can go on and have a look at his arguments and writings and people that have participated in that blog, and you can go on and have a look there. And here is the kind of the other side of that. Anybody that knows my channel, I don't like to just like kind of give one side of the information. I like to people to be able to have the full access of information, and rejection of a position or a verse or a word or a passage should be done through looking at the full evidence and not specifically just one side of the evidence. So once you have a look at the 2 sides of it, and I recommend definitely having a look at James's work here and the links that he's got there.
Well, also regarding 1 John 5:7, look at that page that says 1 John 5:7 and Greek manuscripts, because one thing to realize is that even in the Greek copy that Erasmus had eventually, manuscript 61, we see evidence that Greek text was translated from a Latin text. It doesn't have the articles because it was made from Latin.
Okay.
So when you see the Greek manuscripts that have the comma, and there aren't very many, you can also see that this is coming from Latin, because that's where the comma came from. And obviously, if the comma came from Latin, then it did not come from John. So we shouldn't treat it as scripture. It may be a true statement, but not every true statement is part of scripture.
Okay. Right. We have a question here from Patrick. Let me just remove that so it's just James and myself. Dr. Snapp, what can you tell us about Erasmus and the Book of Revelation? Now, I know you kind of touched on that a little bit previously, but what can you give us on Erasmus and the Book of Revelation?
Well, when Erasmus made his first edition and then later on revised it, he only had one Greek copy that was from his contemporary Reuchlin, and he used that copy. And that copy, and by the way, I have a page that focuses on this, and I have links to page views of it. But Erasmus's copy of Revelation, his Greek copy, was a pretty good medieval copy, but it was missing the last page. And so Erasmus, in order to not delay his book indefinitely, basically retro translated the Latin text that he had, or a Latin text that he had, back into Greek. So in the last 12 verses, there are several readings, about 22, where Erasmus's text does not reflect any Greek manuscripts. It reflects what Erasmus thought the Latin text that he had would say in Greek. And again, there's a post they have on my blog that is just about this subject.
Is that the one, James? There, yes. Erasmus Manuscript of Revelation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously
2814. Now, after Erasmus had it, it was lost for a while, and then later on in the 1800s, somebody found it again. So we can look at this manuscript. By the way, if anybody has a way to contact James White, can you please tell him, stop saying that Erasmus had a Latin commentary on Revelation, and that's what he used. Because, as you can see, we're looking at the manuscript, which does have commentary. It's not a Latin commentary, it's a Greek commentary. It's written in Greek. So James White needs to stop telling people that, because he's wrong. But in this manuscript, there was the text, and then it would stop being commentary for a while, and then there would be more text again, and then more commentary, and so the commentary and text would alternate, they'd go back and forth.
Is it specifically? I'm not sure. Is it in? Does he make that claim in the King James Only Controversy? I'm not sure if it's in that specific book. I've read what you stated about with James White, but I'm not. I can't remember if it's in this book or not.
I don't think so. I have to double check to make sure, but I've seen him do it more than once. He did it very recently in a discussion he had with Peter Van Cleek, who is TR advocate.
Yeah.
And he so even though I pointed out his error on my blog, he's still not getting the message.
I know that there's a lot of people that specifically on some of the channels that that you're on and I'm on as well, that are trying to call for a James Snapp, James White debate. How are you getting on with that? Is he still kind of ignoring you on the are we getting any closer to actually having a debate between the two of you?
If James White would accept a debate on the authenticity of Mark 16:9-20, any place, anytime, anywhere. But so far, I haven't received much response.
James did have a debate with
Jeff Riddle.
Jeff Riddle. I've got Jeff Riddle's book here, or one of the books that he's edited anyway. This one, Why I Preach from the Received Text. So obviously, he is willing to debate on the topic.
Well, he calls his shots. Yeah, it was entertaining to watch James White get handed his head on a platter by Jeff Riddle regarding Mark 16:9 through 4:20, but it was rather exasperating to see Dr. Riddle try to defend it being in Ephesians 3:9 in the second half of the debate, where he's obviously just advocating it because it's the TR. It's not even the Byzantine text. It's not the critical text. It's obviously not the original text. So that's the case where I think we're dealing with what's called a Mumpsimus mentality. Now, people might say, what is the Mumpsimus mentality? Well, it goes back to Erasmus. Erasmus told a story that goes like this. Once upon a time, well, he didn't say once upon a time, but once there was a monk who, when he was giving the Mass, used the word in Latin, Mumpsimus. Well, one day the bishop came to town and was there in the congregation, and afterwards he told the priest, you do know the word should be Sumpsimus, not Mumpsimus. But the priest responded, ah, you go ahead and keep your newfangled Sumpsimus. I'll keep what I have, the word Mumpsimus. So sometimes people's traditional favor toward what they're used to can outweigh what is really the case. And whenever we have a reading that we prefer, we're not able to say, well, yes, that's my reading, or that's what my grandma used to have, or that's what I was taught. But the question is, what is the original text? Even though it may be true, that doesn't make it original. Even though it may make sense to you, that doesn't make it original either. But working through the canons and working through the evidence, that's how we do textual criticism that matters. Anybody can say, I am very, very stubborn. And they can say it by saying, this is the text that I'll uphold, and you can't say anything about it, because if they weren't reasoned into the view, they can't be reasoned out of it. Now, I would hope that Jeff Riddle can be reasoned out of his advocacy of the misreading in Ephesians 3:9. But regarding the ending of Mark, I hope that James White could be reasoned out of his rejection of those 12 verses. I would certainly appreciate it if he would give me that shot.
I don't think James White is going to be changing his position at any time on that. He seems to be kind of stand fast on it, regardless of the amount of information and the evidence that he's shown. I would absolutely love to see a debate between you and James White on that. I think it would be a really interesting conversation between the two of you, but ultimately I think James White would not stand a chance, and probably that's the reason why he won't actually debate you on that topic.
If you would like to debate the woman called an adultery, or if you would like to debate the word from the cross, Father forgive them, I'd be happy to take him on about those two things as well. Not that I just wake up every morning thinking, wow, what can it be debate today? But it would be nice to correct some of the badly misinformed things that he said.
Yeah, I work hard at trying to correct some of the things that James White states, especially in his book, and I enjoy doing that as well. Talking of debates, you did have a debate with Stephen Avery on. I'm not sure exactly how long ago it was now, but I did watch it recently, actually. I went back and watched it again on the Sinaiticus and what the kind of the originality of that and when it came into being, which I actually really enjoyed. Stephen says that he won that debate, and I'm pretty sure that you would say that you would as well.
Well, anytime somebody has to say who won the debate, it's kind of like the old saying about, I think it came from Game of Thrones. I'm not sure. I don't watch the show. Somebody once said, the person has to keep telling you, "I'm the king. I'm the king." He's not really the king. But the key point in the debate, and I think this is the main focus, and really, I think anybody is welcome to watch the debate and see this point being made. Steve was trying to say that Constantine Simonides is responsible to some degree for making Codex Sinaiticus. But Constantine was a proven liar, and we can see one of his lies when he says in his own writings that only a little bit of Hermas was in the Codex because it ran out. He ran out of parchment. But since the time of Simonides, at the monastery in Egypt, the St. Catherine's Monastery, more of Sinaiticus has been discovered, including those pages from toward the end of Hermas. And there's only one reason why those pages are there, because they were in the manuscript originally. So Simonides is demonstrated to be basically an outlier of this evidence. Then there's no way to salvage it. So Simonides' deception cannot be salvaged. He's simply a liar. And I hope Stephen would realize that.
Okay, so this is the book from Tischendorf, Constantine Tischendorf, his book on Codex Sinaiticus and his how he found Codex Sinaiticus. I really did enjoy that discussion that you had with Stephen, and maybe you would be interested in the future, possibly, of going back and revisiting and having another discussion, because I know that Stephen says that it was kind of the two of you were kind of newbies to the whole debate type thing. Whether that's correct about you, I'm not too sure. I haven't really seen too many videos of you actually kind of debating specific topics. Plenty of videos and YouTube on different YouTube channels where you're actually having discussions with different people. But I don't know if that's something that you would be interested in the future, possibly. Yeah, so that's Codex Sinaiticus. So I did want to just, I am aware of time, and I know that you might probably do need to go. I just wanted to, in a message that I sent you recently, I spoke about 1 Timothy 3:16 and your position on that. And at the time, you stated that you weren't too sure which way you were swaying. Do you have kind of a position on there, or are you still trying to look at the evidence for it?
I would hit to keep a footnote there. Very many manuscripts say God was manifested, but in Greek, it's one of those variants that uses a nomina sacra. And like I said, when I was discussing the canons, how they're applied, the guidelines, readings that involve nomina sacra, sacred names, these have a special value. But in this case, the nomina sacra for God is abbreviated in two letters. And those are the same as theta and sigma. But theta and sigma, the Greek letter theta looks like the O with a line through the middle, a horizontal line. Well, all the scribe would need to do is not cross his T, so to speak, and thus he would thus write the article, Haas. So we're basically dealing with a variation that comes down to a line crossing. Not even a whole letter, there's part of a letter. And that makes the difference between God was manifested and who was manifested. So this is actually a very small variant, but has a very big effect on how it's translated. Rather on what gets translated. But Codex Alexandrinus is an important witness, and some of the earlier textual critics who looked into 1 Timothy 3:6 said very clearly, we see it with the sacred name, with God. And later on, somebody, no, it's the article. Well, one way to get to the bottom of it is to do a spectrometric analysis of Codex 8A, to put it under a machine camera that can do multispectral analysis. And I think that really needs to be done to find out what Codex Alexandrinus' original reading was. And after that, we can make a decision with that in the mix. But that hasn't been done yet. And since that hasn't been done, then our evidence is incomplete. Dean Bergen, in one of his books, I see his name there.
Yeah, the revised in the revised vision.
A very detailed analysis
one.
of 1 Timothy 3:16 in one of his books. So I would refer readers to that. Now, not everything Dean Bergen has written has stood the test of time, but that's a good starting point.
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend. He has a section in his book on the actual on the reading of Codex Alexandrinus and the evidences for and against. So this is basically my website. This is my writing on that particular verse. It was the reason I messaged you, because I was interested in your opinion on that while I was writing that specific writing that blog that I posted recently back in September. So I was interested in that.
I would point out that there are hundreds of readings in the TR that are not in the Byzantine text. And for those that want to say, well, we want the text that was used by the church all through the Middle Ages and earlier by Chrysostom and so forth, if you really want that text, then you don't want the TR exactly. You want something like the TR, which is what the EOB, the Eastern Orthodox New Testament, and in the Old Testament, they use the Septuagint as their base text. But in the New Testament, the EOB is a very good translation. It uses as its base text the patriarchal text that was compiled in 1904 and then revised in 1912. And the translation is very good. I would say it's considerably more accurate than the King James. And its base text is a better representation of the Byzantine text than the TR is. So,
just quickly, I just remembered about the David W. Daniels book. I don't know if you've actually read this one. I expect you have. Your opinions on? I know we're going back to Sinaiticus now. Yeah. Obviously, we kind of skipped over that, but it was just something that came to me to remind me. What are your opinions on the information that he's presented in that book on Sinaiticus?
Well, Mr. Daniels is a very kind individual. He seems very cordial. But I would say he is a very lousy researcher. And point after point after point after point, he's simply wrong. Regarding Codex Sinaiticus, he makes numerous errors. And at my blog, I point out in a series of 4 blogs on the subject of why Sinaiticus is not by Constantine Simonides. I go over these points again and again and again, and I would hope that a person who is capable of reason could see that the idea that Simonides had anything to do with the production of Codex Sinaiticus is absurd. Absurd, absurd, absurd. And those posts are at my blog. I think if you use the search bar and look for theories among the wheat, there's a review of that. Can you use the search bar and look for that?
Yeah.
What is theories?
There's
TARES.
there a review
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
That's
If you look at those posts they have there, Seneca is not a forgery, setting the stage. That's number one. And then using 10 reasons why Sinaiticus was not made by Simonides. And then using, yes, that's the first one.
Yeah.
Then 10 more reasons why Sinaiticus was not made by Simonides. And then looking into what darkened Sinaiticus, that should answer all questions by those who are actually seeking answers and who don't have an agenda of saying, well, we have good reasons not to follow Sinaiticus. Now, Codex Sinaiticus is a way overrated manuscript. I've shown on my blog, if you look at the cases where I do what's called a hand-to-hand combat blog, which takes some time to make, because in hand-to-hand combat, I take a passage from a late manuscript and compare it with an early manuscript. And sometimes the early manuscript that I use is Codex Sinaiticus. And over again, the more recent manuscript has a better text, no matter how you slice it, that has a better text than Codex Sinaiticus.
There's one specific one that I've just brought up. It's just the hand-to-hand combat. I just searched for hand-to-hand combat just to bring it up, and that one specifically is Sinaiticus versus 490 in Luke 15:1 through 10. And obviously, you go through all of the verses and show all the differences between the readings in those manuscripts. These are really interesting to go through and study. I mean, the amount of work that you do on these types of studies are crazy. I hope that people actually do go to these and have a look at this, because the information presented in here is phenomenal. There's not many people out there that are doing this type of specific work that James is doing on his website. The information is really, really detailed and gives you so much information.
And also, Codex Sinaiticus does have a significantly different text, which does mean significantly different things. James White might give the impression, intentionally or unintentionally, who can say, but he sometimes gives the impression that Sinaiticus says the same thing as the ordinary manuscripts would say. But we look at the details, obviously it does not. And again, just look at my blog, I have the data there that shows this is the case. But LJ, I have to wrap it up.
Yeah, it's so we're into 1 hour, nearly 40 minutes, and James has obviously got to go. Thank you very much for coming on. I just make sure that I haven't missed any questions that anybody has asked specifically, but I don't think that I have. I think we've covered everything. This has been a really fascinating discussion. I really appreciate that you coming on. I know that we've obviously talked about it for a while, and I really do appreciate you coming on to the channel, giving your views on textual criticism. The information that you've given surely should allow people to start thinking about the way that they do textual criticism. Have a look at James's website. Again, I will give it. It's thetextofthegospels.com. I will put a link into the description at the bottom of this video. I do appreciate everybody that has come on, and watched, and everybody that has asked a question, and anybody that will watch this back on replay on YouTube. I do appreciate everybody that comes in and watches, and obviously
I have to go for just a minute. I'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah, so like I say, thank you very much for everybody that has watched, has been in and out, and will watch it in the future. Please remember, do give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe if you haven't already. Like I say, in the future, I am planning some interesting conversations with some people with probably different viewpoints than a lot of people that would watch this channel, specifically those that follow me with my interactions with the Hebrew Israelites. I will do a shameless plug for my book, which is available on Amazon. It is a physical book. It's the Holy Bible versus the Hebrew Israelites. If you're interested in knowing some of the information that they kind of they spout and why it is actually false, feel free to go onto Amazon. It is available on most Amazon websites, as you can download it as an ebook, but it is available as a physical book as well. And James is back. Okay.
Yes, I just want to say, for those who are apprehensive about using modern translations like the ESV or the New Revised Standard Version, I would say regarding the New Revised Standard Version updated edition, it's clear to me that whoever made it has been tampering with the text, and I go into that at my most recent blog. Beginning the New Revised Standard Version updated edition, they've obviously made it politically correct with an agenda. I don't know if Michael Holmes is responsible. I don't know if Jennifer Newst is responsible, but somebody has been tampering the text. So I would say, with this version, I have no qualms about saying, don't use this version because it's been tampered with. But regarding the other versions that are modern, with the ESV, the NIV, the CSB, I think people oftentimes veer away from those simply because it's based on the Alexandrian text. And although I would say the Byzantine text is much better than the Alexandrian preference tend to give credit for, those who prefer to use the Byzantine text don't have the King James Version is not your only option. There's also the MEV, which is based on the Textus Receptus. There's also, like I mentioned, the ESV, the Eastern Orthodox translation, New Testament. This is an excellent translation, and it's based on the Byzantine text, and it also has footnotes that let you know about the critical text. There's also a new one called the Evangelical Heritage Version, which is not based exclusively on the Byzantine manuscripts, but it is clear that whoever made it takes the Byzantine text seriously and gives it more credit than those who reject the Byzantine text, as Allen did. Kurt Allen, they give the Byzantine text more credit. And I think there's a growing trend among textual critics to also give the Byzantine text more credit than they used to. Don't think anybody is still calling it irrelevant. So I would encourage people who value the Byzantine text, of which the TR is a part, for the most part, the Eastern Orthodox Bible, New Testament, and also the Eastern Evangelical Heritage Version, and the MEV, all represent the text better than, well, I won't say better, but will represent the text more cogently than the King James. So for those that are inheriting a use of the King James, not everything is as bad as the New Revised Standard Version updated edition. Not everything comes from Westminster Hort. Hort has been superseded at various points in the past 100 years. So new advances are still being made in the field of New Testament textual criticism, and those will eventually be reflected in New English Bibles, or rather, New English New Testaments. Now, I think Nick had asked me earlier about what my text is, or where it's been used. I have a book of Matthew in English as an ebook that's available. Yeah. The translation of it is online. It's an ebook. It's only Matthew because obviously making a compilation independently and then translating it takes time. But Matthew is online there as an ebook, again, 9 cents. And also for Mark, I've made a compilation. The rest, I think I've compiled Philemon and James. Those are also online. And that's really been my emphasis on the Gospels. As far as the translation of it, I would just defer to whoever is using the Byzantine text, because even though the Byzantine text has various readings, like in Matthew, I believe it's 25, 40, 13, where it's clearly got a reading in it that's based on lectionary use or lection use. But even these lectionary use readings were invented by scribes to make the text easier to understand. Not to change the meaning, but to give it an easier, more hands-on approach. To say, I'm not going to give you, reader, a term you don't know. I'm going to give you the modern equivalent that we know it means. Or that would say, okay, reader, in this part of the text, we're talking about Jesus. Even though the text wouldn't say his name, I'm going to put it in because that's who he is. So sometimes in the Byzantine text, you'll get a pronoun, or you get a noun, a proper noun, like Jesus or Peter, where the original text itself would just have a pronoun. But because nobody's introducing a new character, the person speaking is obvious. His identity is obvious, and so sometimes the Byzantine text puts the pronoun instead. Sometimes the Byzantine text puts the proper name instead of the pronoun. But what difference does it make for the reader? It simply makes the text easier to understand. And so many times, the Byzantine text makes the text easier to understand and has the same meaning that the original text would have. So in terms of using a text that has the same meaning as the original, you can, for the most part, use the Byzantine text. And I would prefer Nick to use the EOB. Again, that's this one. To use this as far as the text that would be an improvement upon the King James, especially in areas like Acts 9, 5-6, where the King James reflects a text that does not have any Greek support in the manuscripts. Now, when I say Greek support in the manuscripts, I'm not referring to manuscripts that were based on the printed text of Erasmus or other editions of the TR. I'm talking about manuscripts that have a line of descent, that are part of the Byzantine tradition. So I hope that answers the next question. Thanks.
I'm on mute. I keep doing that. Yeah, so I'm sure that does answer Nick's question. So yeah, we are going to wrap this up. I really do appreciate you coming onto the channel. Maybe one day we'll get you back and we'll go into specific variants such as Mark, the longer ending of Mark would be an awesome one. Maybe into some of the readings in Revelation as well. Obviously, as Patrick has brought up, but it has been a really interesting. I have learned a lot, as I always do, from you. I really do appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You as well. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Okay. So, thank you very much for everybody for watching. As I've already stated, I really do appreciate everybody that comes on and watches these videos. And I hope that you really have learned something from what James has stated. Please do go and check out his website. As we've shown it already, there will be a link, and there is so much information there. Go on to Amazon, download his books. The information that you will get in those 2 books is absolutely phenomenal. And again, I look forward to seeing you on my next video.
All right.
Shalom.
Okay, bye.
Bye.